Good morning, let's build a strawberry cage. So I'm just going to put this out there first off, like this is just how I've built my strawberry cage. There's 100 different ways you could build one. You could have one with a fancy lift up lid, you could have one that's just sides that you throw netting over. This is just basically how I build my protection boxes. This is how I built my carrot root fly box. It's just a really dead simple, I'm just making a frame basically and putting netting over the top of it. But I've had a lot of questions about it and it is just really simple. So I did a bit of filming when I was putting it together. So I'm going to put that on now and I'll see you again in a minute. Okie dokie chaps, these are my strawberries on the end of this raised bed here. And what I'm protecting them from mainly are pigeons or birds in general, mice and squirrels. That's the main pest problem that I have on this site. If you've got something much more robust than that you're trying to protect them from, you might need to do something slightly more drastic. The first thing I need to do is to remove a rhubarb here. I've got rhubarb and strawberries in this bed, and at the moment there's a bit of overlap in the middle, and I need my strawberries to be in a block so that I can fit the cage over the top of them. So this rhubarb at this end is going to have to go. So I'm just going to hoik this one out, stick it in a pot and see if anybody else wants it. And just clear a bit of space so I can see what I'm doing. Oh, turns out there's 2 rhubarbs in here. Okay, so that is now my space for my strawberries, and I will infill that gap with some spares that I've got. And I want my cage to sit really neatly inside this raised bed, which will help stop any mice being able to get underneath. So the internal measurement of this bed is 120 centimetres. My cage is going to be made like this. It's dead simple. But my main measurement that I need is where it's going to sit inside the bed. It needs to be 120 centimetres across the back end. Like I've said before, I am using what I've got for this, and what I've got is leftover strips of this which I used to panel my room a couple of months ago. So these strips are 12mm by 43mm, and I've got a load of them left over. So that's what I'm making the strawberry cage out of. So I've carted my spare sticks up to the plot, and first thing we're going to need is 4 lengths of 120 centimetres. Then it's a case of working out how wide I need this to be, because I'm going to, actually the other side's better because that's where the strawberries are actually planted. So I want them to go all the way up to the edge of this rhubarb, which is... So actually that turns out to be 120 centimetres going the other way too. But I'm not going to cut another 4 sticks of 120 centimetres because I need to take the width of the 2 end panels off. And the width of my sticks are 12mm, which means I have to take 2 lots of 12mm off my measurement, which leaves me with 117.6. Yeah. So now I need to cut four lengths of 117.6 centimetres. Okay, height. This is being a strawberry cage. It really doesn't need to be very high. If this was going to be a cage for something that was going to get taller than that, or if it was going to be a cage for red currants or black currants or anything like that, obviously I'd have to make it a lot taller. But I'm going to go for 35 centimetres because none of my strawberries are going to get that tall. They're quite low growing, short varieties. So I'm going to have another 4 of 35 centimetres. The next stage is making up the side frames. I'm doing it this way just because it makes assembly ever so slightly easier. So these are the shorter sides. These are the 117.6s with the 35s on the end of them. I'm going to be putting the long strips over the short ones because I eventually want to have my longer strips on the outside of my frame. That's going to form a tighter seal on the inside of my raised bed. So I'm going to be screwing through my long ones into the short ones rather than the other way around. I'm also, in this case, putting my screws quite far back from the edge, and that's because when I'm attaching my longer pieces to the end, I'm going to have something to screw into, and I don't want a conflict with the screws. As we get onto assembly, I'm also going to pre-screw my longer strips just with screws in the end because the next bit can be a bit fiddly. If I was buying this wood actually for this project, my strip pieces are absolutely fine for the outside, but I would probably buy a more cubed piece to be my uprights. So instead of it being a strip, I would have maybe a 2x2 or a 3x3 as my 35 centimetre uprights, just because it gives you a bigger area to screw into. Whereas with the wood that I've got, I mean, I'm using what I've got, that's just how it is, but it does mean that it's slightly more difficult to kind of get any purchase and really screw into it because you're screwing into quite a narrow area. Pre-screwing these makes this a lot easier. I'm resting these up against this bench just so that I've got a bit of leverage for the screw to kind of push down onto. You want to put them this way, so you've got the frame and then the 120s going on the outside, and your 35 centimetre stick needs to be on the inside of that elbow. Not this way, so it's not going out away from the elbow, it wants to be going in. Like this, so you've got your long strips on the outside, so it's going to fit neatly inside that raised bed. So like I say, this bit can be a little bit wobbly, and it really does help to have somebody else here just to kind of support the other end when you're trying to get the whole thing together. So I'm making this about as simple as it can be made. I've got loads and loads of small metal angles, you know, little brackets in the shed, but I'm actually not going to use them for this for a number of reasons. Firstly, this is not going to have any load on it, and once I get the netting on and it's stretched really taut across the whole frame, that's going to give it added stability. And this is just a strawberry frame for me. There's going to be no load bearing on it. It just needs to be really light, easy to move, and I think this is going to be perfectly strong enough. Also, because my strips are so thin and my 35 centimetre corner pieces are so thin, I don't have any really short fat screws that could attach my angles. I've only got really tiny skinny screws which aren't going to do much good, or I've got really large long ones, and that's just going to make the whole thing more difficult, and I'll end up with kind of screws sticking out and all that kind of stuff. In this case, there's no reason to put angles in, just because it's not going to be taking any load or any weight. It's just going to sit there. So that fits really quite nicely. Obviously I haven't got the netting on yet, but yeah, it's quite nice and tight in those corners. I think the strawberries will be very happy. So let's talk netting. This same frame, like building a frame this way, is so simple. It could be done for any number of things. It could be a brassica cage, it could be a small fruit cage. Like I say, I've made my carrot root fly box in the back corner there that you can see exactly the same way, just with different sizes and shapes of wood, because that's what I had at the time. In terms of netting, the carrot root box is made with enviromesh because it's there specifically to keep out carrot root fly, and carrots don't need to be pollinated. Strawberries, on the other hand, and other fruit need to be pollinated, and if I put an enviromesh box over my strawberries, I wouldn't get any strawberries because nothing can get in to pollinate them. So I'm using a wide fruit mesh, but it's got 2 centimetre holes, which means that the bees can go in and out with no problem whatsoever. It's also quite strong. It's from a company called Gardening Naturally, and they have a huge range of different netting sizes. The netting that I use for my brassicas, which is soft butterfly netting, which has got slightly smaller holes than this one and stops the butterflies getting through, is another one that I use. It's brilliant. But this one in particular is specifically large enough to allow bees to get through, but the mice can't. So that's a massive advantage, and that's really what you're looking for. It's also a really strong netting. It is made with plastic, but it's very, very supple. And I'm pulling this really taut and wrapping it like a Christmas present. So I'm just laying my box on top and then pulling the whole lot around it. Then using my staple gun just to staple it to the sides. And the edges I'm doing in a folded fashion, just like a Christmas present, and then stapling it across the top. It's so easy, but it's really effective, and it's going to work a treat. When I did this exact same process with the enviromesh, I didn't fold my corners right over. I rolled them up so that they were in the edge so that things didn't get trapped in them. But for this one, this is going to be absolutely fine. And it's amazing how much added stability really pulling your netting properly tight across the whole box will give it. And so there we have it, really. I need to level out the ground a bit more because to make a really good seal at the bottom of this fruit cage to stop the mice getting around, the bottom needs to be sealed. Although we do have the added advantage that because it's so tight in against the side of this raised bed, it's very difficult for anything to kind of squeeze down the side. In fact, it's so tight, it's not going in, is it? The netting can't have made that much of a difference. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so it is really tight in there. And when I've leveled out the ground a bit more, that's going to be really good and keep those strawberries totally safe. One thing I have noticed here is that I've left the sticky labels on the wood, which is a bit annoying. I'll have to try and fish them in, but it's a tight fit. And I mean, from this point, obviously, this is just like the most simple way of making a box, and any kind of adjustments that you would make to that, just make. Yeah, if you want to paint it, paint it. That wood is not heat treated or anything. It's not got any protection on it, but it's going to be perfectly good for the purposes that I want it for. I was talking about the angles, putting them in if you needed it to be stronger. So part of the reason that I haven't needed to do that on mine is that not only is the wood itself really light, so just putting those 4 screws in each corner, because the wood itself is so light, that's one reason I don't need to do it. Secondly, the netting is really light, and the tension on the netting is holding it all together, is giving it extra structure. But also, because the netting has got such large holes, the wind can just pass through it without really kind of moving the box. Whereas if I was making it with plastic, so a polyplastic, that kind of cover, because I've used that exact same method of making a box before and just covered it in plastic, and then that can be transferred onto all different crops. But if I was using plastic or, for example, the enviromesh really has got very, very tiny holes, and the wind really does push against that. So I have used angles in the enviromesh carrot root fly box because I used really thick wood for that as well. It was 2x4s and then strip wood across the top. So it's totally different construction, exactly the same method, but in terms of the materials that I used, it was quite different, and I did use a lot of angles in that one. But this one is so simple, and the netting is fantastic. It's really, really strong. I've got links underneath to not only the netting that I used in this build, which was the fruit netting, but I've also got soft butterfly netting that I use for my brassicas, and also the enviromesh that I used for the carrot root fly box. So if you're planning to do some other sort of box protection, it all comes from a company called Gardening Naturally, which is just a really great company for all those things. It's also where I got the nematodes from, if you watched the nematode video. Yeah, and that's about it, guys. I hope that's useful. I mean, it's like I say, it's like dead simple. It was an under an hour's project, and I was just using leftover scrap from a project. That box could be made as big or as small as you want. I hope that was helpful. This is the first of the Thursday's video releases, so we'll see how it goes. And I will see you on Tuesday.